All right, let's dive into this fascinating world of Cuban crocodiles. We're going deep on a PBS NewsHour video all about conservation efforts. And Cuba is surprisingly diverse, like a biodiversity hotspot, species you just don't see anywhere else.
Yeah, it's really something else. I mean, geographically and politically, Cuba's history, it's like this evolutionary lab, so much isolation. And the way species develop there, it's just remarkable.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Okay, Cuban crocodiles, the species that's really struggling. And this video, it introduces us to Toby Ramos. He's a biologist, and he's dedicated his life to protecting them. He's known as the crocodile whisperer. Can you believe that? Working in the Zapata swamp for over 40 years?
The Zapata Swamp, wow, that's got to be a tough place to work. What's amazing to me is this guy Ramos has captured thousands of crocodiles. And get this, only been bitten twice.
Wow.
I mean, that's beyond textbook knowledge. That's like real expertise.
Makes you wonder how he does it right. But it's kind of sobering, too. Even with all his skill, the Cuban crocodile. Still critically endangered, only about 3,000 left.
And the threats are complicated. Poaching has been a huge problem for a long time. But now there's this new concern, hybridization. They're breeding with American crocodiles.
Yeah, I was really struck by that, too. It's ironic in a way. American crocodiles doing great, and the Cuban crocodiles struggling. What does that even mean for the future?
That's the million-dollar question. Could this hybridization mean we lose the Cuban crocodile as a species? It's
Yeah.
a real possibility.
Wow.
Makes these conservation efforts even more urgent.
So the Cuban crocodiles are in trouble. But what about the bigger picture? The video also shows us how vibrant and biodiverse Cuba is. Mangrove swamps, coral reefs, the whole thing.
Cuba's like a crown jewel for biodiversity in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
I mean, the variety of ecosystems. And the government really protects these areas. It's become a haven for wildlife.
That's amazing. And there's Natalia Rossi
Wow.
from the Wildlife Conservation Society. She's working with Ramos. And her perspective on all the challenges, it's really valuable.
Yeah, Rossi's insights are really important,
Oh.
especially for understanding how conservation fits in with Cuban society and their policies.
Right. And then the video takes us bird watching. We get to go with biologist Madiel Morera, spotting all these incredible birds in the Zapata swamp. They even see the Cuban trogon, Cuba's national bird.
It's not just how many birds there are. It's what they tell us about the Zapata Swamp itself. A healthy bird population means a thriving environment. And that's good for the Cuban crocodile, too.
It all connects. And I got to tell you about this funny bit. With the Cuban screech owl, Morera was just captivated by it, this tiny little owl. And he said the best word for it in English was cute.
Uh-huh.
Even scientists can't resist nature's charm.
Yeah, those moments of wonder are important. That's why we protect biodiversity in the first place.
For sure. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about some scientific discoveries. The video introduces Dr. Anna Porsakansky from the American Museum of Natural History. She and a team from the Cuban Museum of Natural History, they went on this expedition to Humboldt National Park back in 2015. They found some pretty amazing stuff.
That collaboration between American and Cuban scientists, it's a big deal. Shows how international cooperation can unlock the secrets of Cuban biodiversity.
Yeah, and they weren't just looking for any species, they were looking for new ones. Humboldt National Park is huge, so much unexplored territory.
It's really like a hidden laboratory, untouched by the outside world.
Yeah.
And that kind of isolation. It's challenging, but also it offers these amazing opportunities for discoveries.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much we really know about Cuban biodiversity.
Right, what else is out there? But it also brings up a bigger question. Can Cuba's natural wonders survive with more tourism and development coming?
Yeah, that's the big question. As tourism grows, more pressure on resources, sustainable practices are going to be so important. It's a tricky balance. A lot of places with biodiversity are facing the same thing.
And then there's those Cuban crocodiles. Can they adapt to all this? Or will the hybrids take over? Such an uncertain future. I really want to hear more about what could happen.
Yeah, it's fascinating and complex. The Cuban crocodile's fate is really tied to all the conservation efforts in Cuba. Finding that balance between preserving their natural heritage and the needs of a growing population. That's the challenge. We'll dig into that more in the next part of our deep dive.
We were talking about that balance.
Yeah.
Between conservation and development, especially as Cuba opens up to more tourism. It's tough, right? How do you protect these amazing ecosystems while letting the economy grow?
It's a challenge everywhere, honestly. But with Cuba, it's like their isolation. It's been good and bad, limited resources and scientific exchange, yeah. But it's also meant they haven't had as much impact on the environment compared to other Caribbean nations.
It's like they have a fresh start almost. But it also means the stakes are higher as they try to figure out how to manage tourism and development. Sustainably, of course.
Exactly, and that's where these collaborations, like the one with Dr. Porskansky and those Cuban scientists, they're so important. It's not just sharing what they know, it's also about building up their capacity and making sure that conservation efforts are based on the best science available.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So tourism, it's great. More people are seeing Cuba's natural beauty. But how do we make sure that tourism benefits the local communities and the environment?
That is the question. Tourism done right. It can be really powerful for good. It can bring in money that supports conservation, and it makes people more aware of these natural areas. But it's got to be sustainable.
We need to find that balance, right? Where tourism doesn't just become extractive and end up harming the very things people are coming to see.
Think of it more like a partnership, where tourism and conservation actually work together. So that means encouraging responsible travel, educating visitors about respecting wildlife, and making sure development doesn't encroach on sensitive habitats.
And that probably means working closely with local communities too, right? Making sure they benefit from tourism and have a say in how it's managed.
Absolutely. Community-based conservation. That's crucial. When locals are involved in protecting their own natural heritage, they're invested in its success.
It all goes back to what we were talking about before with the Cuban crocodile, poaching and habitat loss. But then you add in this whole other thing with the hybridization with American crocodiles.
It's a fascinating case study, how these species interact and adapt. On the surface, you might think more crocodiles is good, but when you really look at it, this hybridization could affect the genetics of the pure Cuban crocodile in the long term.
So it's not just numbers then, it's about preserving the unique genes of this species. Is there like a risk that the Cuban crocodile as we know it could disappear and be replaced by this hybrid species?
It's a legitimate concern. Scientists are watching this really carefully. Will these hybrid crocodiles behave the same as the pure Cuban ones? Will they thrive in the same habitats, face the same challenges?
It's like watching evolution happen right in front of us, and it makes you realize that conservation isn't just about protecting what's here now, it's about ensuring the survival of these species for the future.
Well put, it's about thinking long term, understanding how everything is connected, and recognizing that what we do, individually and as a society, it can impact that delicate balance of nature.
This brings us to hope. What's the outlook for the Cuban crocodile? Is there reason to be optimistic?
Well, the good news is there are some truly dedicated scientists and conservationists out there, like Toby Ramos and Natalia Rossi, working so hard to protect these amazing creatures. And they're not alone. International collaborations are bringing in new resources and expertise. That's boosting research and conservation efforts.
That's good to hear. But ultimately, the Cuban crocodile, like a lot of endangered species, faces an uphill battle. The threats are real, the future's uncertain. What can we do as individuals? Is it enough to just be aware? Or are there things we can actually do to help?
Awareness is the first step for sure, but action is what makes change happen. We can support organizations like the Wildlife Conservation Society. They're doing amazing work, protecting these species and their habitats. We can be smart consumers, supporting businesses that prioritize sustainability and ethical practices. And we can advocate for policies that promote conservation and responsible tourism.
And we can't forget about education. The more we know, the more we can help.
You got every little bit counts. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Speak up, advocate for change. Let your representatives know you care about the future.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening. We've explored this incredible world of Cuban biodiversity, met some fascinating species, and really dug into some tough questions about conservation development and the choices we make. As a global community...
Yeah, I think the big takeaway here is we're all connected. What happens to the Cuban crocodile? It's connected to ecosystems everywhere, and ultimately to our own future.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a part to play in protecting the amazing diversity of life on our planet. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep advocating for our planet. We've been focused on the Cuban crocodile and lake, how its challenges are really a reflection of bigger issues facing Cuba and the world. It's a lot about finding a balance, right, between protecting nature and development, especially with how fast things are changing.
Yeah, and Cuba's story is really interesting because they were so isolated. They haven't dealt with the same intense development that other parts of the world have.
Right. It's like they have this chance to do things differently, learn from what's happened elsewhere, and put sustainability first from the beginning. But they still need to grow their economy and protect all their natural wonders.
Absolutely, it's a delicate balance.
Right.
And that's where sustainable development comes in. It's not about stopping progress. It's about finding ways to progress without hurting future generations.
So it's about thinking long-term, right? Considering how everything's connected. Social, economic, environmental. Are there examples of this working in Cuba?
There are some positive signs. Cuba's really committed to renewable energy. And there's more focus on community-based conservation, where local people are empowered to protect their resources.
Like Natalia Rossi and the Wildlife Conservation Society. Those partnerships seem so important, combining local knowledge and scientific expertise.
Yeah, they're key. And there is this growing understanding in Cuba and globally that protecting biodiversity isn't just the right thing to do. It makes economic sense, too. Healthy ecosystems provide so much. Clean water pollination, climate regulation, it all matters.
We're starting to get it, finally, that we can't separate a healthy planet from a healthy economy.
Exactly. And Cuba. They had this opportunity to build that understanding into their development from the start. Maybe they could be a model for other countries.
Speaking of learning from each other, those international collaborations are so important, like the American Museum of Natural History, working with the Cuban Museum of Natural History.
Invaluable for both Cuba and the global movement. That sense of shared responsibility is crucial, and it speeds up discoveries and innovation.
There's definitely this urgency in the scientific community to understand and protect biodiversity, especially in places like Cuba where there's still so much to discover. What happens there affects everyone.
No question about it. Conservation is a global issue. What Cuba's facing, it reflects the challenges of our whole planet. Climate change, habitat loss, how ecosystems are connected. What we learn from Cuba can help us everywhere.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling hopeful, but also concerned. Hopeful because of all the amazing work being done, but concerned because the threats are so real.
I agree, it's a pivotal moment. We can't just sit back. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and actively support conservation efforts, both locally and globally.
And it starts with us as individuals, learning about these issues, making smart choices, supporting the right organizations.
Exactly. Every action matters. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Speak up. Push for change. Let your leaders know you care.
This deep dive has been a real journey. We've explored Cuban biodiversity, met some incredible creatures, and confronted some big questions about our future.
Yeah, the key takeaway for me is our interconnectedness. The Cuban crocodile's fate. It's tied to the fate of ecosystems all over the world, and ultimately to our own future.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect the amazing diversity of life on our planet. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep advocating for our planet.